Welcome to the channel, I'm your host, the Outdated Gen Z. Welcome to the Sonic CD Music Battle. Make sure to watch part 1 first, I already did all the present tracks. So this video, as you can tell by the title, I'm going to be doing the bad future tracks. Now just like the first part, it's going to be set up the same way. I'm going to be playing the entirety of the song first. I don't care about copyright, so cool. And also I want both the Japanese soundtrack and the North American soundtrack to be very toe-in-toe. So I'm using the most definitive way to listen to these songs, which is the Missing Music Restoration mod for Sonic CD 2011, along with extra edits that I personally did in my audio editor with all these tracks for that mod. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get right into it. immediately hopping into Palmtree Panic. So, the Japanese version is, of course, a banger, I have nothing else to say. But the North American one, although a banger as well, I do think that it's a little bit chill for a Bad Future. It still fits for a Bad Future track, but it's just really similar to the present version of Palmtree Panic in the North American soundtrack. It has a more chill vibe and it fits the more tropical feeling of Palmtree Panic. The Bad Future in the Japanese soundtrack literally defines Palmtree Panic. It feels like that you're panicking in palm trees. That sounds really dumb, but the Japanese soundtrack wins because of that. So here we are with Collision Chaos Bad Future. The Japanese soundtrack is absolutely incredible. I really love that bass. It's just so funky, you know? Meanwhile, the North American soundtrack, it's still good, but just like the previous song I mentioned being Palmtree Panic Bad Future for North American soundtrack, the North American soundtrack of Collision Chaos Bad Future is very similar to the present version of Collision Chaos in this soundtrack, but the only additions I can really hear is just some extra guitars. It's still good, and it's not fully the same as the present track with extra guitars on top. But with how similar the track sounds, it's just kind of lame. So I'm giving this one to the Japanese soundtrack as well. Now on Tempest. Honestly, in the Japanese soundtrack territory here, I really like this techno track. It's super awesome and definitely one of my favorite tracks in the entire Sonic franchise. But I do think that the North American soundtrack has the edge over the Japanese soundtrack in this one. I do think that it fits the stage a lot better, because the vocals that are in the background of this song kind of sound like that they're drowning in a way, because, you know, Tidal Tempest is a water level. So it's just kind of cool, you know? So yeah, North American soundtrack wins this one. Alright, on to Quartz Quadrant, my favorite zone in Sonic CD. So let's start with the North American soundtrack this time. I just want to mention that the Bad Future track is actually similar to the Good Future track, just played in a different key. I think. I don't really have that much knowledge on music theory stuff. It is honestly a really cool detail, even though that I already complained about Collision Chaos and Palmtree Panic being similar to the present tracks in their respective North American soundtrack versions, but I think these are passable enough because they're just taking place in the futures. But I still like the Japanese version a lot better for Quartz Quadrant Bad Future in this case, because I'm just such a big fan of all the samples played in Quartz Quadrant Bad Future. That's really my only reason why, and also it's just like a really banger techno song again, kinda. So yeah, Japanese soundtrack wins this one. So Wacky Workbench here, Japanese soundtrack, holy shit, that honestly fits very well. The song opens up with like a meltdown sound effects with a bunch of alarms going off and stuff like that. It's really cool, honestly. But I still am a big fan of the North American soundtrack for the Bad Future here. It still fits well for a factory Bad Future, but it fits a lot better because it doesn't seem like that Wacky Workbench here ever went on a meltdown. It just sort of just got slightly run down. Maybe if the entire place was like, you can tell there was a meltdown going on, I think the Japanese soundtrack would automatically win here just for the atmosphere of it all. But because of that, the atmosphere wins in the North American's case, so I'm giving this one to the North American soundtrack. Alright, now time for Stardust Speedway Bad Future. But I'm also going to count this towards Metal Sonic's theme because the Bad Future track is played during Metal Sonic's boss fight even when you're in the good future of Stardust Speedway. So both of these areas of the game is going to be counted towards this. So I'm keeping both the actual zone in mind and the boss fight in mind when I'm talking about this track. So the Japanese Stardust Speedway Bad Future is just iconic, let's all be honest. It's a banger. We all love it to death, and I can't lie, I love it too. The samples are just iconic. But it honestly kind of makes Metal Sonic seem like a joke, even though that the boss fight is very easy in Sonic CD, not gonna lie. But I want a more epic boss theme when I'm fighting Metal Sonic, so I think the North American soundtrack does a lot better of a job representing Metal Sonic, while I do think that the Japanese soundtrack fits very well for the Bad Future of Stardust Speedway. The North American soundtrack kinda does, not as much as the Japanese soundtrack, but because that the North American soundtrack practically carries the Metal Sonic boss fight, and hell, they even made a special remix of it in Sonic Generations as an unlockable that you can play during the Metal Sonic boss fight, so it proves that they think that it's a cool enough theme. And yeah, just the one shout I'm gonna give out to Sonic Forces, there was a remix of the North American Stardust Speedway used for the Metal Sonic boss fight in that game, so that's pretty awesome too. So yeah, the North American soundtrack wins this one, only because it mostly gets carried by Metal Sonic's boss fight feeling a lot more impactful and epic.
Anything, so go and be them try. Get some help.
here we are. The final tracks we're going to be taking a look at in this video today. Metallic Madness, Bad Future. So the Japanese soundtrack sounds so good, man. It's so awesome. It kind of reminds me of Thriller by Michael Jackson, and I think that might have been the actual inspiration behind it. Tell me if I'm wrong or not, but yeah, whatever. But it's a banger, of course. It has awesome samples and awesome samples. What am I doing? And the North American soundtrack is really good as well, but it is very, very similar to the present track, just more techno-y sound effects and stuff, and a guitar too, which is really awesome, to be honest. But I do think the North American Metallic Madness Bad Future kind of gets a little repetitive after a while. So yeah, I'm gonna give this one to the Japanese soundtrack. It just makes sense. I'm sure lots of people agree with me out there. It's just so awesome, so banger. I'm really bad at describing music. There we go, that was the Sonic CD Music Battle Part 2, which is still considered Wags' Game Music War Round 1, because, yeah, isn't this fun? But yeah, Part 3 is going to be the good future tracks, and Part 4 is going to be the other tracks in Sonic CD that isn't the main stage music. So, with that, I'll see you in the next one, and the one after that.